The human vessel emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the orbital harmony station and immediately drew attention for all the wrong reasons. The ship was small and unremarkable compared to the grand vessels of the Galactic Concordat that surrounded the massive station like jewels orbiting a crown ambassador Sarah. Chen stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Endeavor and watched through the view screen as alien ships dwarfed their modest craft. She smoothed her diplomatic uniform and took a deep breath. "Well, team," she said to her delegation of 5 humans. "Let's make history." The Endeavor docked at the outermost port of orbital harmony, and the human delegation stepped into a world beyond their wildest dreams. The station stretched 4 kilometers in every direction with gleaming corridors that seemed to pulse with bioluminescent light. Talions of a dozen different species moved through the corridors, and each one made the humans feel smaller and more inadequate. The Krillians stood 3 meters tall, with armored exoskeletons that gleamed like polished obsidian and natural weapons protruding from their forearms. The Vex Collective moved as one, their hive mind allowing perfect coordination that made human teamwork look clumsy and sloth. The Raxians possessed 6 limbs tipped with razor-sharp claws, and their reptilian features spoke of apex predators, even the smallest species present. The Quilvon had natural advantages over humans with their ability to shift their skin color for camouflage and their lightning-fast reflexes. A Krillian official named Vex approached the human delegation and looked down at them with what might have been amusement. "You are the humans," Vex said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. His translation device rendered the words in perfect English, but couldn't hide the condescension in his tone. "Ambassador Chen of Earth." Sarah replied and extended her hand. Vex stared at the gesture for a long moment before reaching out with one massive claw and gently touching her palm. The Krillian seemed afraid he might break her fragile bones. Vex said and turned without waiting for a response. The humans hurried to keep pace with his long strides. The Grand Council chamber took Chen's breath away. It was a vast circular room with a transparent dome that showed the stars beyond, and representatives from 12 species sat in elevated seats that ringed the chamber. The humans were directed to a small platform at the center that felt more like a defendant's dock than a place of honor. Speaker X9 of the Vex Collective addressed them first. Being was a floating mass of interconnected neural tissue suspended in a containment field, and when it spoke, 100 voices harmonized as one. "Humans of Earth," the voices said, "the Galactic Concordat welcomes you to the greater community of sentient species." Chen smiled and prepared to deliver her carefully rehearsed speech. "We are honored too, however," Zix9 interrupted. "Preliminary assessments of your species indicate significant limitations that must be addressed." Chen felt her smile freeze. "Limitations?" A Thoraxian counselor named Raxthor leaned forward in his seat, and his yellow eyes gleamed with what looked like pity. "Your species lacks natural defenses," he said, and gestured with one clawed hand at Chen's body. "No armor, no venom, no enhanced musculature, and your sensory organs are remarkably limited. Furthermore," added a counselor from the aquatic Delphi species, "your cognitive processing speed is significantly below average, and you lack any form of telepathic or hive mind communication." Chen felt her colleague Marcus Webb tense beside her, but she kept her voice level. "We may not have natural weapons," she said, "but we have developed technology and culture that—" Yes, Vex interrupted with a dismissive wave. "Your technology is adequate for a developing species, but you must understand that in the Concordat, roles are assigned based on natural capabilities." Zixneen's 100 voices spoke again. "We have reviewed your history and biology and have determined that humans are best suited for Class 4 membership." Chen's heartsong. She had studied the Concordat's classification system during the journey and knew that Class 4 meant second-tier citizenship. "Class 4 species," Zixneen continued, "are granted membership but are restricted from military service, security roles, and high-level diplomatic positions. You're saying we're not good enough to defend ourselves." Webb spoke up, and his voice carried an edge that made several aliens shift uncomfortably. "Not good enough," Raxthor corrected, "simply not suited by nature for such roles." He gestured at his own formidable claws. "Evolution has made some species warriors and others artisans, and there is no shame in accepting one's natural place. We propose," said High Speaker Zixneen. That Earth accept protectorate status under Concordat oversight, and we will provide military protection, while humans contribute in areas more suited to your abilities. Chen looked at her delegation and saw the frustration on their faces' webs. Jaw was clenched so tight she thought his teeth might crack, and the others looked equally angry, but she also saw something else in their eyes, and that was determination with respect. Chen said carefully, Earth declines protectorate status, and we request full partnership in the Concordat. As equals, the council chamber filled with what could only be described as alien laughter thexes. Rumbling chuckles shook the platform beneath. Chen's feet equals, he said, and shook his massive head. Little human, you stand barely to my chest, and your bones would snap if I embraced you as I would a fellow Krillian, and you speak of equality. Chen stood straighter and met his gaze without flinching. Physical strength isn't the only measure of worth, she said. Perhaps not, Zixnine acknowledged, but it is a significant factor in survival and in this galaxy. Survival determines value. The debate continued for hours, and the humans argued their case with passion and logic. They presented evidence of human achievement, innovation, and adaptability, but the council remained unconvinced. Finally, as the station's artificial sun began to dim to simulate night, the council reached a decision. The Concordat will grant humanity provisional membership, Zixnine announced. Not as a protectorate, but with significant restrictions. Chen waited and barely dared to breathe. You will be assigned support roles. The High Speaker continued agricultural development, entertainment production, cultural exchange, and medical research for species compatible with your biology, and after a probationary period of 5 standard years, we will reassess your classification. It wasn't what Chen had hoped for, but it was better than outright rejection. We accept, she said, and we will prove ourselves worthy of full membership. Dex looked down at her with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. I hope you are correct, little human, he said. For your sake and for the sake of your world. As the delegation returned to the Endeavor that night, Webb slammed his fist against the corridor wall. They treat us like children, he growled. Chen placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we'll show them what children can do when underestimated, she said quietly. None of them knew that within 6 months, the galaxy would learn exactly what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. Concordat had made their first mistake, and they assumed humans were weak. They would soon discover that weakness and restraint were not the same thing. 6 months had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Concordat, and the reality of their second class status had settled like a weight on every human in Concordat. Space Marine Sergeant Marcus Webb stood on the observation deck of the agricultural colony Verdant 7 and stared out at the endless fields of alien crops that stretched to the horizon. His platoon of 30 Marines had been assigned here as evacuation coordinators, which was a fancy way of saying babysitters for farmers. Webb was a career soldier with 15 years of service and 2 combat tours in Earth's last major conflict. Now he spent his days running drills for scenarios the Concordat assured him would never happen. Sergeant Corporal Rodriguez called out as she jogged across the deck. You're going to want to see this. Webb followed her to the command center, where the rest of his platoon had gathered around a holographic display. The news feed showed footage of a Concordat mining station called Helios 9, and what remained of it. The station was a burning wreck, and bodies floated in the void. The Devourers hit them 3 hours ago. Rodriguez explained that Devourers were a new threat that had emerged from uncharted space 2 months prior. They were an insectoid species that seemed to exist only to consume and destroy. Unlike the Concordat species, they had no interest in diplomacy or territory. They simply attacked, killed, and moved on to the next target. How many casualties? Webb asked. Over 400, Rodriguez said quietly. Mostly civilians. Webb watched the footage and studied the wreckage with a tactical eye. The Concordat defense platforms were still intact, but they had been bypassed entirely. The defensive grid wasn't breached, he muttered. The Devourers went around it. Concordat command says it was an unpredictable attack pattern. Private Chen said. Webb snorted. Nothing's unpredictable if you're paying attention. He pulled up tactical data from the attack. and began analyzing the Devourer. Movements. The aliens had come in 3 waves, and each wave had struck from a different vector. The Concordat forces had responded exactly as their protocols dictated and repositioned to meet each threat, but by the time they moved, the Devourers had already hit their real target and moved on their testing responses. Webb said to himself, "Sir, Rodriguez asked, the Devourers aren't attacking randomly." Webb explained and gestured at the tactical display. "Look at this," and each wave forced the Concordat to reposition, and by the 3rd wave, the defenders had pulled ships away from the civilian sectors. That's where the Devourers focused their final assault. Chen realized Webb nodded. They're learning how Concordat forces respond, and they're exploiting it. The door to the command center opened, and Battlelord Dex entered. The massive Krillian had to duck under the doorframe, and his armored bulk filled the small room. "Sergeant Webb," Dex rumbled. "I trust you have seen the news." "Yes, sir," Webb replied. "I was just analyzing the attack patterns." Dex's expression was unreadable. Behind his armored faceplate, the Concordat Military Command has already conducted a full tactical analysis, and they have concluded that the attack was a random raid with no strategic significance. Webb couldn't keep the disbelief out of his voice. "Sir, with respect, the evidence suggests..." "The evidence," Dex interrupted, "has been reviewed by military analysts with centuries of combined experience, and your opinion on the matter is noted but unnecessary." Webb felt his jaw clench, but he nodded, understood. "Sir," Vex moved closer and looked down at the human sergeant. "I know this frustrates you," he said more quietly, "but you must understand that the Concordat has maintained peace for over 3,000 years using proven military doctrine, and we do not abandon successful strategies based on the observations of a species with no galactic combat experience." "No galactic combat experience," Webb repeated. "Just thousands of years of fighting each other?" Dex made a sound that might have been a sigh. "Precisely," he said. "You are accustomed to fighting your own kind, and the Devourers are not human, and they do not think like humans, and our protocols are designed for threats you cannot imagine." After Dex left, Rodriguez moved beside Webb. "He's not going to listen to us." She said no. Webb agreed. "He's not over the next 2 weeks." The Devourers struck for more targets, and each attack followed the same pattern and probed the defenses. Learn the response and exploit the predictable behavior of Concordat forces. Webb watched each engagement and made detailed notes. He began to see the bigger picture. The Devourers were working their way toward something, and each attack brought them closer to the densely populated core sectors of Concordat space. Webb tried to share his findings with Dex and with other Concordat commanders. Each time, he was politely dismissed. "They think we're idiots," Private Martinez said one evening as the platoon gathered for dinner. "They think we're primitive," Rodriguez corrected. "There's a difference, is there?" Chen asked. Webb listened to his soldiers vent their frustrations and understood their anger since arriving in Concordat space. Humans had been given the least important assignments. They were decorators for diplomatic functions, entertainers for alien crowds, and guards for locations that needed no guarding. The other species treated them with a mixture of pity and amusement. A Krillian had once patted Webb on the head like he was a child, and the memory still made his blood boil. "We knew this would be hard," Webb said finally. "We knew they'd underestimate us, and the question is, what we do about it. What can we do?" Martinez asked. "We're 30 Marines on an agricultural colony, and we can't exactly declare war on the Concordat." Webb pulled up his tactical analysis on a data pad. "We can prepare," he said. "Because when the Devourers come here, and they will come here, and the Concordat's precious protocols aren't going to be enough." The platoon gathered around as Webb shared his findings. He showed them how the Devourers adapted to every defensive strategy and how they exploited the rigid hierarchy and predictable tactics of Concordat forces. "So what's our play?" Rodriguez asked. Webb looked at each of his soldiers in turn. "We do what humans do best," he said. "We adapt, and we improvise, and we survive. And when the time comes, we show these aliens what a species forged in constant warfare can really do." The platoon began training in earnest. They couldn't use live ammunition without Concordat approval, but they could run simulations and practice tactics. Webb drew on every bit of military history he knew and strategies from ancient Earth battles, guerrilla warfare techniques, urban combat maneuvers, and psychological operations. Concordat officers who observed their training seemed confused by the chaotic nature of human military exercises. Concordat soldiers trained in formation and practiced predetermined responses to specific scenarios. Human Marines trained by throwing unexpected problems at each other and rewarding creative solutions. Your soldiers never follow the same approach twice, Dex observed one day. That's the point, Webb replied. Predictability gets you killed. Dex shook his massive head. Consistency ensures coordination and reliability. Until you face an enemy who counts on that consistency, Webb countered. 3 weeks after the first Devourer attack, long-range sensors detected a massive fleet. Entering Concordat space, the Devourers were coming in force, and their trajectory would bring them directly to Verdansk. And Webb watched the tactical display and felt his heart rate increase. This was it, the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. Battlelord Vex addressed the colony's defense force with calm confidence. We will implement Protocol 7, he announced. Defensive positions will be established according to standard doctrine, and evacuation of civilians will proceed through designated routes, and the Devourers will be repelled as all previous threats have been. Webb looked at his platoon and saw the same thought reflected in their eyes. Standard doctrine was going to get everyone killed, but they were just humans, and what did they know about galactic warfare? They were about to find out. The Devourer fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Verdansk 7's system like a swarm of locusts. Descending on a harvest argent, Marcus Webb stood in the command center and watched the tactical display light up with hundreds of enemy contacts. Battlelord Dex commanded. The defense from the center of the room and his armored form radiated confidence. All forces to positions, Dex ordered. Implement Protocol 7 as rehearsed. The Concordat garrison moved with perfect precision. Fighters launched in predetermined formations and defensive platforms activated in sequence, and ground forces took up positions that had been calculated by military computers using 3,000 years of tactical data. Web I felt sick watching it. They're doing exactly what the Devourers expect, he muttered to Corporal Rodriguez. Sir, we have to stay out of it, she whispered back. Those are direct orders. Webb knew she was right. X had made it crystal clear that human forces were to focus solely on civilian evacuation. They were not to engage in combat under any circumstances. The first wave of Devourers hit the outer defense platforms. Aliens were nightmare creatures, and each one was 3 meters of chitinous armor, razor-sharp limbs, and single-minded aggression. They threw themselves at the Concordat defenses with suicidal intensity. Enemy Wave 1 engaging Sectors 3 and 7. Aquilvon tactical officer reported. Thex nodded. Redirect mobile forces to reinforce those sectors. Webb watched the Concordat ships reposition. It was textbook tactical response, and it was also exactly what the Devourers wanted. Sir, Webb spoke up. They're baiting you. Thex didn't even look at him. Focus on evacuation coordination. Sergeant, the second wave of Devourers appeared from behind a nearby moon and struck from a completely different angle. Concordat forces scrambled to respond, and ships that had just repositioned were now out of place. All forces execute defensive rotation Gamma, Dex commanded. The Concordat military moved with beautiful precision again. It was exactly the wrong move. Webb pulled up the civilian evacuation routes on his datapad and felt his blood run cold. The Devourer's third wave was forming, and their trajectory would bring them directly through the evacuation corridors. Battlelord, Webb said urgently. The third wave is going to hit the civilian transports. Negative, Dex replied. Our analysis shows the third wave will engage Sector 9. Your analysis is based on their previous patterns, Webb argued. But they've been learning your responses, and they know exactly where you'll be. Dex turned and fixed Webb with a hard stare. Sergeant, You will return to your assigned duties, or I will have you confined to quarters. Webb looked at the tactical display and at the blinking icons representing thousands of civilian lives, and then at his platoon gathered around him, every one of his Marines was watching him and waiting for his call. He had two choices: and follow orders and watch people die, or disobey and possibly save them. Marines, Webb said quietly, gear up, and we're moving to intercept Sergeant Webb. Dex's voice was dangerous. Stand down immediately. Webb ignored him. Rodriguez, take first squad and set up a defensive position at Junction 7 and Martinez. Second squad to Junction 9 and Chen. Third squad is with me. The Marines moved without hesitation. They grabbed their weapons and equipment and headed for the exits. I am ordering you to stop. Dex shouted. Webb turned to face the battlelord. Then have me court-martialed after we save these people. He ran. The human platoon moved through the colony's corridors with practiced efficiency. Webb led third squad toward the primary evacuation route where thousands of civilians were being loaded onto transports. Devour, third wave incoming. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the com. 60 seconds to contact. Webb reached Junction 12 where the main corridor opened onto the landing platforms. Families of various alien species crowded the space, and parents carrying children and elderly being helped along by younger relatives. They all looked terrified. Sergeant Webb, a Delphi evacuation coordinator, swam up in her mobile water tank. What are you doing here? And you're supposed to be at the command center. Change of plans, Webb said. Get these people loaded faster, and we're about to have company. The Devourer ships screamed overhead and began their attack run. Webb's tactical instincts kicked in and honed by years of combat that the Concordat had dismissed as primitive. Chen. Martinez, spread your squads along the platform perimeter, he ordered. Overlapping fields of fire, and remember your training and adapt to what they do the first. Devour drop pods slammed into the landing platforms. Pods split open and disgorged their nightmare cargo. The creatures that emerged were pure killing machines, and each one moved with terrifying speed, and their mandibles clicked with hunger. Open fire. Webb commanded the human Marines, unleashed a devastating barrage, but unlike Concordat forces who maintained their positions and fired in coordinated volleys, the humans were constantly moving. They used cover and advanced and retreated and shifted angles. When a Devourer adapted to one firing position, the humans had already moved to another. Private Jackson threw a smoke grenade and used the cover to flank 3 Devourers who were focused on his squad. Matescorpel Kim noticed that the aliens' eyes were sensitive to rapid light changes and began using her weapons, targeting laser to blind them before firing. They hunt by movement, Chen shouted over the com. Freeze when they charge and then dodge at the last second. Webb watched his Marines implement the tactique. Devourer would charge at a stationary Marine and build up speed, and at the last possible moment, the human would dive aside and the creature would smash into a wall or obstacle. It was creative, and it was adaptable, and it was completely contrary to Concordat military doctrine, and it was working, sir. They're trying to cut off the evacuation transports, Rodriguez reported. Webb assessed the situation in a split second. The Devourers were moving to destroy the ships before civilians could board second squad. Create a diversion, Webb ordered. Make noise and draw them toward the east platform. Martinez understood immediately. Marines, with me, and make these bugs think we're the main course. Second squad began firing wildly and shouting and even playing music from a portable speaker. The cacophony was unprofessional and chaotic, and completely alien to Concordat military culture. It was also exactly what the situation needed. The Devourers, attracted by the noise and movement, redirected towards second squad. First and third squads cover the civilians. Webb commanded. The evacuation continued under the protection of human Marines who fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They didn't hold rigid formations. They didn't follow predetermined protocols. They assessed, adapted, improvised, and overcame. A group of Devourers tried to outflank first squad's position. Rodriguez saw the attempt and immediately improvised. Jackson, Bennett, fall back and make it look panicked. The two Marines retreated in apparent disorder. The Devourers took the bait and pursued them directly into a kill zone where the rest of First Squad was waiting. It was a tactic as old as warfare itself, and the feigned retreat. The Concordat military didn't use such deceptions because their protocols didn't account for them. Humans had been using them for thousands of years. Back at the command center, Battlelord Dex watched his tactical display with growing shock. The Devourer's third wave had indeed struck the evacuation routes. As analysis had been wrong, the humans had been rightened. Now those same humans were holding positions that should have been overrun in minutes. How are they doing this? Asked a Vex tactical officer. Thex zoomed in on the human positions and watched Sergeant Webb coordinate his forces. The human sergeant was everywhere at once and directing fire, repositioning squads, and exploiting every weakness in the Devourer attack. They're not following any doctrine I recognize. Thex said slowly. That's because they don't have one, the Vex officer observed. They're adapting to each moment. Vex watched as a human Marine used an agricultural harvester as a battering ram to crush 3 Devourers. Another Marine had rigged an improvised explosive from maintenance supplies. A third was using the colony's irrigation system to create muddy terrain that slowed the insectoid aliens there, turning everything into a weapon. Vex realized for the first time in his long military career, the Battlelord felt something he had never experienced in combat. He felt inadequate in the landing platforms. Webb coordinated the final transport launch. Last ship away, the Delphi coordinator reported. All civilians evacuated. Marines fighting withdrawal, Webb ordered back to secondary positions. The human platoon retreated in controlled stages, in each squad covering the others as they fell back. It was textbook tactical movement, but executed with a fluidity that came from training to adapt rather than training to follow. Script Sergeant Webb. Dex's voice came over the com. Concordat reinforcements are arriving and you may withdraw your forces. Webb saw the Concordat fleet dropping from orbit and fresh troops deploying. Copy that, Battlelord. Webb replied. Marines, fall back to base. As the platoon regrouped, Webb took stock of his people. They were battered, exhausted, and covered in alien blood and ichor, but they were alive, and more importantly, so were the thousands of civilians they had protected. Rodriguez approached Webb with a grim smile. Think they'll still call us primitive after this? Webb looked toward the command center where he could see Dex's massive form watching them. The medical bay of Verdun 7 smelled of antiseptic and alien. Blood Sergeant Marcus Webb sat on an examination table while a Delphi medic treated a deep gash across his shoulder. The wound wasn't serious, but it required attention, and Webb barely noticed the pain. His mind was still on the battle and reviewing every decision and every order. You should rest, Sergeant, the medic said in her bubbling voice. Your body needs time to heal. I'm fine. Webb replied automatically. The truth was that he felt anything but fine. Had disobeyed direct orders from a superior officer and put his entire platoon at risk. The fact that his actions had saved lives didn't change the reality that he had committed insubordination. The door to the medical bay opened, and Battlelord Dex entered. The massive Krillian had to duck to fit through the doorway, and his armored footsteps echoed in the quiet room. Webb immediately stood and came to attention at ease. Sergeant, Dex said. His voice was different from before, and quieter and thoughtful. The medic excused herself and left the 2 soldiers alone. Thex moved to the observation window and stared out at the colony where repair crews were already working to fix the damage from the battle. I came to place you under arrest, Vex said finally. Webb's heart sank, but he kept his expression neutral. I understand, sir. However, Vex continued, I find myself unable to do so. The Krillian turned to face Webb. You disobeyed my direct orders, and you undermined my authority in front of the entire command staff and by every regulation in the Concordat military code. You should be court-martialed. Webb waited, but you were right, Dex said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. My analysis was wrong, and my protocols failed, and if you had followed my orders, thousands of civilians would be dead. Dex moved closer and looked down at the human sergeant sit. Please, he said. I wish to understand what happened today. Webb sat back on the examination table, and Vex pulled up a chair that looked comically small beneath his massive frame.
Ow.
Did you know where the third wave would strike? Vex asked Webb. Pulled up his datapad and showed the Battlelord his tactical analysis. The Devourers had been testing your responses in every engagement, Webb explained. They attack from one vector and observe how you reposition, and then they attack from another angle and watch you adapt, and by the third strike, they know exactly where your forces will be. Vex studied the data are tactical. Computers analyzed these same battles and they concluded the attacks were random, because your computers were looking for patterns that match Concordat doctrine, Webb said. But the Devourers don't fight like you do, and they fight like predators, testing prey and looking for weaknesses. And you recognize this because... Webb hesitated because that's how humans fight, he admitted. We probe defenses and exploit weaknesses and adapt our tactics based on enemy response, and we've been doing it to each other for thousands of years. Vex was silent for a long moment. Your entire species has been at war with itself for millennia. He said slowly, not continuously, Webb corrected.
Hush.
But yes, and conflict has been a constant in human history, and yet you're not extinct. Vex observed. Webb smiled grimly. We learned to be very good at survival over the next hour. Webb walked. Dex through the battle from the human perspective. He explained how his Marines had used improvisation and psychological warfare and adaptive tactics that came naturally to a species forged in constant conflicts, listened with growing fascination. And horror when Private Jackson used smoke for concealment, and that's not in our tactical database. Vex said it's a technique that's thousands of years old on Earth, Webb replied. We used it before we even had gunpowder and Corporal Kim's discovery that the Devourers were sensitive to light changes. Battlefield observation, Webb explained. We train our soldiers to look for exploitable weaknesses in real time, and not just to follow predetermined strategies. Dex shook his head in amazement. The Concordat has maintained peace for 3,000 years using military protocols refined over centuries, and you're telling me that human soldiers can simply observe and adapt better than our most advanced tactical computers? Not better, Webb corrected. Different, and your computers are designed to optimize known strategies against known threats, and humans are designed to survive unknown threats by any means necessary because you had to. Dex realized because we had to. Webb agreed. The Battlelord stood and paced the medical bay. I must report this to Concordat Command, said. They need to understand what happened here. Will they believe you? Webb asked. Dex pulled up a holographic display. They won't have a choice, he said. The entire battle was recorded and the footage is already spreading through Concordat networks. Webb watched the playback. It showed his platoon in action and their chaotic but effective tactics and their ability to turn anything into a weapon. It showed humans doing what they did best and surviving against impossible odds. The Vex Collective has been analyzing the footage, Vex continued. They're particularly interested in your tactical flexibility. He pulled up another file, and this one was a report from Vex. Observer ZYX-9 Webb read through it and felt a chill run down his spine. The Vex had done a deep analysis of human history. They had cataloged thousands of years of warfare and studied Earth's military evolution from ancient battles to modern conflicts. The report detailed strategies humans had developed, including guerrilla warfare and combined arms, tactics and psychological operations and strategic deception and urban combat and so much more. Every major advancement in human civilization had been shadowed by war. Agriculture had led to territorial conflict. Cities had required fortification technology, had been weaponized. Exaven's space exploration had military origins. You evolved in constant conflict. ZX-9's report concluded, where the Concordat species evolved in relative peace and developed warfare as a necessary tool. Humans evolved with warfare as a fundamental aspect of existence, and this has created a species uniquely adapted to combat innovation and tactical creativity. Webb closed the report. That's not who we want to be, he said. Quitlithex looked at him. Explain. Every human alive today grew up learning about the horrors of war. Webb said, we study history not to celebrate our victories but to understand our mistakes. and most of us hoped that when we reached the stars, we could leave that legacy behind, but you cannot. Dex observed. No, Webb admitted. We can't change what we are, but we can choose what we do with it. The door opened, and Ambassador Sarah Chin entered. She looked exhausted but relieved Sergeant Webb. She said, "I'm glad you're alive, Ambassador." Webb nodded. Chun turned to Dex Battlelord. "I've received communication from the Concordat Council, and they wish to speak with you immediately." Dex nodded and left the two humans alone. Chen sat beside Webb. "You've caused quite a stir." She said, "I just did what needed to be done," Webb replied. "I know," Chen said. "And now the entire galaxy is watching footage of humans in combat, and they're terrified and fascinated and equal." Measure. She pulled up her own datapad and showed Webb the public reactions. Some species were calling for humans to be given military command positions, or demanding that humans be restricted even further because they were too dangerous. What's going to happen? Webb asked. Chun smiled tiredly. "That depends on us." She said, "We have an opportunity to redefine humanity's place in the Concordat, but we have to be careful in showing them. We can fight as one thing, and showing them we can be trusted as another." 3 days later, Webb was summoned to Orbital Harmony Station. He arrived to find that he and his entire platoon had been awarded the Concordat's highest honor for valor. High Speaker Zixnine presented the medals personally. "The Concordat recognizes that our initial assessment of humanity was incomplete," the 100 Voices said. "You have proven yourselves capable warriors, and you have saved lives that our own forces failed to protect." Webb accepted the medal, but felt the weight of what it represented. The galaxy now knew that humans could fight, but the real challenge was showing them that humanity wanted peace more than Warbottle Lord. Dex approached Webb after the ceremony. "I have a request." The Krillian said, "Sir, I want you to train Concordat forces in human combat doctrine," Dex explained. "Our military needs to learn adaptive tactics if we're to defend against threats like the Devourers." Webb felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "I'll do it," he said, "but on one condition. Name it when this is over, and when the Devourers are defeated." Webb said, "I want to train Concordat forces in something else." "What?" Webb met Dex's gaze. "How to prevent wars from starting in the first place." He said, "Because killing is easy, and living with what you've done is the hard part, and humans know that better than anyone." Dex was silent for a moment, and then he extended his massive hand. Webb shook it. The gesture had more meaning now than it did 6 months ago when they first met. Then it had been condescension. Now it was respect turned in blood and fire and shared survival. 3 months after the Battle of Verdant 7, Sergeant Marcus Webb stood before a classroom of alien soldiers and felt more nervous than he had facing the Devourers. Training facility on Orbital Harmony was state-of-the-art with holographic combat simulators and advanced tactical displays. 40 students sat before him, and representing 8 different Concordat species. Each one looked at him with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. "Good morning," Webb began. "I'm Sergeant Webb, and I'm here to teach you how humans fight." A Krillian officer raised his massive hand. "Sergeant, our briefing materials say you're going to teach us tactical improvisation. And what does that mean?" Webb smiled. "It means I'm going to teach you to break every rule you've ever learned about warfare." The class shifted uncomfortably. "For 3,000 years, Webb continued, the Concordat has relied on military doctrine that assumes your enemies will fight logically and predictably, but the Devourers proved that assumption wrong." He activated the holographic display and showed footage from recent Devourer attacks. These attacks all follow the same pattern, and they probe your defenses and learn your responses and exploit your predictability. But here's the thing, and humans stopped being predictable. About 10,000 years ago, over the next weeks, Webb put the Concordat soldiers through training that challenged everything they knew. He taught them to question orders if those orders didn't match battlefield reality. He showed them how to use terrain creatively and turn ordinary objects into weapons and adapt tactics mid-battle. Most importantly, he taught them to think like their enemies. Predictability is the enemy of survival. Webb repeated constantly, "If your opponent knows what you'll do, you're already dead." The training was grueling. Concordat soldiers were used to precise formations and predetermined responses. Webb threw chaos at them and changed scenarios mid-exercise, and rewarded creative solutions over textbook answers. Corporal Rodriguez assisted with the training, and her specialty was psychological. Operations warfare isn't just physical. She explained to a class of Vex Collective members. It's mental, and if you can make your enemy doubt themselves, you've won before the first shot is fired. She demonstrated with examples from human history and deception campaigns, and propaganda, and even something as simple as using noise to disorient opponents. The Vex found the concept's fascinating and disturbing. You weaponize information itself. One Vex student observed, everything can be a weapon if you're desperate enough, Rodriguez replied. And humans have been desperate for most of our history. Meanwhile, Ambassador Chen was fighting a different kind of battle. In the Concordat Council chambers, not all species were happy about humanity's rising prominence. You're giving these primitives too much authority, argued Counselor Raxter of the Thraxians. Just because they can fight doesn't mean they should command with respect, Chen replied. The Battle of Verdun 7 proved that human tactical knowledge saved lives that traditional the Concordat doctrine couldn't protect. One battle, Raxter countered. And your species has been here less than a year, and you cannot expect us to abandon 3 millennia of military tradition based on a single engagement. High Speaker Zix9 interceded. The Vex Collective has completed our analysis of human military history, the 100 Voices said. Our findings are concerning. Chen felt her stomach drop. Concerning how? A holographic display materialized and showed data that made Chen's blood run cold. Vex had calculated that, in the past 5,000 years of human history, there had been only 268 years of global peace. The rest had been marked by conflicts ranging from small skirmishes to world wars. Your species, Zixneen continued, has been in a state of warfare for 95% of your recorded history, and this is unprecedented among Concordat member species. Murmurs of alarm spread through the council. Furthermore, the Vex continued, human technological advancement shows a strong correlation with military need, and many of your greatest innovations were developed for warfare and only later adapted for peaceful purposes. Chen knew she couldn't deny the data. That's true, she admitted. But you're missing context. She stood and addressed the council. Yes. Humans have spent most of our history at war with each other, but we also spent that entire time learning the cost of war in every conflict. Taught us something about the price of violence. She pulled up her own data. Look at our most recent history, she said. After our last world war, humanity has spent 70 years building international cooperation and reducing conflicts and developing technologies for peace. Because you feared mutual destruction? Raxter said. Exactly, Chen agreed. We learned that our capacity for violence required an equal capacity for restraint, and that's what makes humans valuable to the Concordat, and not just our ability to fight, but our understanding of why fighting should be the last resort. The debate continued for hours in the training facility. Webb was having his own philosophical discussion. Battlelord Dex observed a training exercise and watched as a mixed unit of humans and aliens worked together to solve a tactical problem. The scenario was simple and defend a position against overwhelming odds. The Concordat soldiers wanted to establish a perimeter and hold it. The human soldiers suggested a fighting retreat. That would draw the enemy into a trap. Your way preserves honor, a Krillian soldier argued. Ours preserves lives. Both are important, Webb interjected. But you have to decide which matters more. In the moment Dex approached Webb after the exercise, you're teaching them more than tactics, the Battlelord observed. I'm teaching them what humans learned the hard way, Webb replied. That survival requires flexibility, and that honor doesn't mean much if you're dead. Some in the Concordat fear you're making our military too much like humanity. Dex said. Webb looked at his students. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, he said. But I'm also teaching them something else. What? When to stop fighting, Webb explained. Humans know how to start wars, and we're good at it, but we also learned how to end them, and how to rebuild, and how to turn enemies into allies. He gestured to the mixed unit. Look at them. And 3 months ago, these soldiers would have never trusted human tactical judgment, and now they're arguing with each other about the best approach. And that's progress. Dex rumbled his approval. You're right, he said. And there's more news, and the Devourer attacks have decreased significantly since. We implemented your training, and they're adapting to our new tactics. But we're adapting faster. Webb felt a surge of satisfaction. That's the key, he said. Stay ahead of your enemy's learning curve. 6 weeks later, the Concordat received word that the main Devourer fleet had been located. High Speaker Zixnine called an emergency council session. The Devourers are massing for a major assault, the Vex reported. Their target appears to be Harmony Station itself. The council chamber erupted in alarm. We must evacuate. One counselor suggested we must fortify. Another countered. Ambassador Chen stood. We must fight, she said. But we fight smart, in using every advantage we have. She looked at Battlelord Dex. Assemble a task force, she said. Mixed species and mixed tactics, and human soldiers alongside Concordat forces. The council hasn't authorized. Raxter began. Then authorize it, Chen interrupted. Because traditional doctrine won't win this fight, and you all know it. The vote was close, but it passed within days. The largest combined military force in Concordat history assembled around Orbital. Harmony's Argent Webb found himself commanding a battalion of mixed-species soldiers. His second in command was a Krillian officer who had been one of his first. Students ready, Sergeant? The Krillian asked. Webb looked at the tactical display showing the approaching Devourer fleet. No, he admitted. But we'll adapt. The battle that followed would be recorded in Concordat history as the turning point. The Devourers attacked with overwhelming force and expected the predictable Concordat response instead. They faced an enemy that fought like nothing they had encountered. A men trained. Units used feints and ambushes and psychological warfare. They adapted mid-battle and exploited weaknesses and turned the Devourers' aggression against them, but they also showed restraint when Devourer forces retreated. The Concordat didn't pursue into obvious traps when enemies were disabled. They were captured rather than killed. The humans had taught the Concordat not just how to win battles, but how to fight wars that could actually end after 16 hours of intense combat. The Devourer fleet broke and retreated for the first time since they appeared. The insectoid aliens had been decisively defeated in the aftermath. Webb stood on the observation deck and watched. Repair crews work on damaged sections of the station. Thex joined him. The council is voting on humanity's final classification, the Battlelord said. And Webb asked. They're proposing Class 1 status, Dex replied. Full membership with no restrictions. Webb nodded slowly. That's good. You don't sound happy. Webb turned to face his friend. I am, he said. But I'm also worried, and the galaxy now knows. Humans can fight, and some species will want to use that, and others will fear it. What do you want? Vex asked. Webb looked out at the stars. I want humanity to be known for more than just warfare, he said. I want us to be remembered as the species that helped others find peace. That's a worthy goal. Dex agreed. It's also going to be harder than any battle we've fought, Webb said.